everyone and welcome to Smart World with CNBC. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans Smart World avec CNBC, votre émission 100% bilingue en anglais et en français. We're together to have an overview of the greatest business moments of CNBC. At the top of this program, Donald Trump ajoute 20 noms à sa liste des nominés de la Cour suprême. Quel avenir pour les mesures de la BCE? Et l'UE continue de faire confiance à Huawei. C'est parti, let's go! On commence notre journal par cette image forte de la politique américaine. Le vice-président actuel Mike Pence et Joe Biden se saluent avec leurs coudes. Joe Biden and Mike Pence meet an elbow bump at 9/11 Memorial at Ground Zero in New York City. Un message d'union adressé au peuple américain face à la pandémie. Et quelques mois avant les élections, Trump ajoute des noms sur la liste des candidats à la Cour suprême. Trump adds 20 names to Supreme Court shortlist, including Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Trump has touted the rapid appointment of young conservative judges to the federal bench as one of the signature successes of his first term.
Joe Biden has refused to release his list, perhaps because he knows the names are so extremely far left that they could never withstand public scrutiny or receive acceptance. He must release a list of justices for people to properly make a decision as to how they will vote. It is very important that he do so. My original list of potential justices include many of our nation's brightest legal minds, such as Bill Pryor, Amy Coney Barrett, and Thomas Hardiman. Outstanding people. Like those distinguished individuals, the 20 additions I am announcing today would be jurists in the mold of Justices Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, and Samuel Alito.
De nouveaux noms qui visent à satisfaire la base la plus croyante du Parti républicain. Peu de temps après l'annonce, un des candidats a posté cette phrase sur Twitter « Il est temps que Roe v. Wade s'en aille », une référence à la décision historique sur l'avortement. Et Donald Trump continue de pousser les universités à garder leurs étudiants sur le campus, et ce, malgré l'augmentation des cas de coronavirus. Trump said his administration has reviewed data from more than 20 colleges and not a single student who tested positive for the virus has been hospitalized. Let's hear more on CNBC.
It's also crucial for colleges and universities to stay open, and we hope that they do indeed stay open. We want to see Big Ten football. We hope it's coming back. We have a lot of the colleges that we're talking about. They want to come back. We hope that Michigan agrees. We hope that, and I know the governor will have a lot to say about it. We hope she approves it. But we have a couple that Maryland's another one. We hope the governor puts a little pressure on so that we can have it. But I have a feeling they may do it. They may do it without having everybody, but I think they're going to have maybe Michigan, maybe Maryland. We have a couple of states that might not participate, but people are working very, very hard to get Big Ten football back, and I'm pushing it. It's much safer for students to live on campus, and low-risk young people would rather than the alternative. The alternative is no good than going home, spreading the virus to high-risk Americans. They want to be on campus. They want to go back to school, and the parents want them back in school, maybe more so than they want to be back in school. And they want them back safely, and they want to go back safely, but they have to go back. Based on the recent data from more than 20 colleges, not a single student who tested positive for the virus has been hospitalized. So that's a lot of people, that's a lot of students. Not one has been hospitalized.
Le président Donald Trump persiste. Les universités qui ont rouvert leurs portes doivent continuer à organiser des cours en présentiel. Il affirme que les campus représentent un risque moindre pour les étudiants et que les renvoyer chez eux serait bien pire. A spike in cases doesn't seem good for the fall. L'automne arrive à grands pas et on craint un renforcement de l'épidémie. Dr. Anthony Fauci earlier disagreed with President Donald Trump, saying that the COVID-19 cases are rounding out. Let's hear more details from Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner.
Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner and CNBC contributor, sits on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. Dr. Gottlieb, why don't we start there? Do you think we're rounding the corner? Have we got halfway through the corner?
I'm worried that we're going to make higher highs and higher lows, that we're heading into the fall with a lot of infection. We may be hitting the sort of low point right now. And as we get into the fall, we're going to see infections start to rise, as Dr. Fauci said. We're heading indoors in the fall. The epidemiology of spread changes. Respiratory pathogens spread more efficiently in the fall and the winter season. This is a respiratory pathogen and a pathogen that typically spreads in the fall and the winter. We're going back to school, back to college campuses. We are seeing some outbreaks there that are going to be the focal point of spread within some communities. And businesses are trying to restart. And the other element here is that we're kind of exhausted. We've been social distancing and wearing masks and staying at home for a long period of time. And so you may get some fraying among people, just the adherence to the things that we know have been preventing spread. So the setup for the fall is difficult. We're taking an awful lot of infection into the fall, and the belief is that it's really only up from here. We have not reached any element of herd immunity. There's no reason why this would stop spreading in the fall and the winter.
Selon l'ancien commissaire de la FDA, il n'y a aucune preuve claire que les chiffres diminuent, contrairement aux récentes annonces de Donald Trump. Je vous le rappelle, les États-Unis ont dépassé 6,4 millions de cas confirmés, avec plus de 193 000 décès dus à la Covid-19. And Oxford University and AstraZeneca resume coronavirus vaccine trial. Les essais reprennent seulement quelques jours après la suspension de l'étude liée à des effets secondaires signalés chez un patient britannique. Commentaire de l'OMS.
So first of all, WHO has always welcomed the conduct of so many clinical trials around the world for so many vaccine candidates. And because the more we have that are tested for safety and efficacy, the better the chances of finding one that is safe and efficacious and can be deployed widely. Now, when you do clinical trials, we're basically looking for two things. We're looking for protection, or what we call efficacy, compared to the control group. And then you also look for safety, which is side effects, adverse effects, all the way from very minor side effects to serious adverse events. And every clinical trial protocol has built into it a SOP, operating procedure for how you manage these side effects. So the clinicians at the site where the trials are being done are trained in good clinical practices, which means that they're following all these participants closely, monitoring them, and then there is a protocol for what you do when something happens. And if it's a mild side effect, there are things to be done. If it is major, as it was in this case, it was a severe side event, and therefore the trial was halted. And again, this is normal procedure. This is good clinical practice, because safety is of the utmost, is the highest priority in any clinical trial. And so the trial has been halted. The Data Safety Monitoring Board is going to look into the details of this individual with the reported side effect. There will be obviously discussions and then a decision made on how to proceed. So I think this is a good, perhaps a wake-up call or a lesson for everyone to recognize the fact that there are ups and downs in research, there are ups and downs in clinical development, and we have to be prepared for those. It's not always a fast and a straight road, but we don't need to be overly discouraged because these things happen, and we have to wait for the determination by the Data Safety Monitoring Board on this particular case, and then what the next steps are going to be for this vaccine trial.
Les responsables de l'OMS déclarent que le retard de l'essai du vaccin d'AstraZeneca était une alerte et un appel à être plus prudent. Ils rappellent que même si c'est une course contre la montre, les laboratoires doivent rester extrêmement vigilants. And a poll from the Kaiser Family Foundation found that Americans are increasingly skeptical about the safety and efficacy of a coronavirus vaccine. Robert Littan, expert à la Brookings Institution, pense que le gouvernement américain devrait inciter les citoyens à se faire vacciner en leur proposant une rémunération. On écoute.
Well, the reason I say that is just the cold, hard math, and that is that the infectious disease doctors say we need at least 60% of the population to have antibodies in their body to ward off the virus. But no vaccine is perfect, and even if you optimistically assume 75% effectiveness, that means in order to get to herd immunity for the vaccine, you need 80% of the people to take the shot. Now, as you said, roughly half the people in the country now refuse to take the shot. You're right that probably after the election that number will go up as long as not only the FDA says the shot's okay, but realistically, I think Dr. Fauci says the shot's okay. That number may grow higher. We may get to 60, 70%, but how do you bridge that chasm to get up to 80% where we no longer have to worry about masks and social distancing? And I say, look, if we're not going to force people to take the vaccine, which Dr. Fauci has said we're not going to do, there's really only one other way that I know of that we can get to that 80% threshold, if in fact 80% will protect us, and that's actually to pay people.
What's the cost of this going to be, and why, Robert, if it's something that needs to be done that people don't want to do on medical grounds, isn't the answer just to force them to make it pass a law that makes people have to take it?
Well, I think that would be incredibly divisive at this point, and I think if you just look at the widespread public resistance right now to wearing masks, can you imagine the public uproar if you basically told people, 30 or 40% of the country that doesn't now want to take the vaccine or more, you're going to have to take 1 or 2 shots? I think you'd have massive resistance. I don't think such a bill could get through Congress. And even if it did, I don't think you'd be able to enforce it. And so realistically, I'd rather apply essentially sugar rather than, or honey, so to speak, rather than vinegar. And that honey would be a payment. And you ask how much would it cost? My seat of the pants estimate is that $100 a person isn't going to do it. Probably $500 isn't going to do it. But $1,000 really gets you into the neighborhood where you can switch people's minds, especially with a family of 4. You're talking about $4,000 at a very difficult time financially for the people in this country. And I think that would flip the switch and get us to 80%, and that roughly would cost us in the neighborhood of $250 to $275 billion. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but we've spent trillions of dollars right now trying to protect people from the economic ravages of the virus. And you're talking about trillions more dollars in lost economic output as long as the economy does not fully recover. So compared to the trillions of dollars of cost, the $275 billion to me is a bargain.
Selon cette étude, 54% des Américains disent qu'ils ne voudraient pas obtenir une vaccination gratuite si elle était approuvée avant le jour du scrutin. Selon Robert Littan, ce serait une dépense d'environ 300 milliards de dollars. And strategists are keeping an eye on the trajectory of ECB monetary policy in the months ahead. Le Conseil des gouverneurs de la BCE entend poursuivre ces mesures actuelles. ECB's Christine Lagarde shifts burden to government to aid recovery. But is the door open to more changes in the future? Let's listen.
It is absolutely possible that we see some tweaks or even some major shifts in the PEP in the first place, and also in the purchasing programs altogether. As we know, the range of the PEP in its usage of the past average of the last couple of months would make it end by roughly mid-year 21. And if we expect that the economy will not have returned to its potential or to even pre-COVID growth, then we will probably need some longer-lasting stimulus. So I think, yes, December is a good point in time to look at further stimulus, and it will probably be rather on the quantitative side, rather on the price side. So more about the PEP rather than about interest rates.
And when we talk about the economic recovery, it seems that it's getting a bit more sluggish than we had anticipated back in June or July. What are your expectations for the remainder of the year for the Eurozone?
That's interesting because in the summer meeting, the ECB did nothing, and they were sort of almost complacent about the trend of the recovery. It looked like a perfect V at the point in time. Now we have seen some economic indicators softening, and it rather looks like a Nike swoosh. It rather looks like a much more shallow recovery at a later stage, and also throughout the remainder of this year. So I think also you could also hear that from the latest interventions by Philip Lane. So I think that the ECB itself is getting a bit more cautious. We will see that in the new staff projections out today. So I think that this is another reason why the ECB will stand ready to do everything it takes to really underpin this recovery.
Martine Lueck, stratège en chef des investissements pour l'Allemagne, l'Autriche, la Suisse et l'Europe de l'Est au sein de la société de gestion d'actifs BlackRock, la BCE garde encore la porte grande ouverte pour de nouvelles mesures. And did you hear about Jane Fraser last week? Everyone is talking about her in the US. Un vrai changement dans le monde de la finance. C'est la première fois qu'une grande banque de Wall Street nomme une femme PDG. Wells Fargo analyst Mike Mayo discussed what it means for the New York Stock Exchange.
We got some big news out of one of the biggest banks. Citi announcing Jane Fraser will take over as CEO next year when Michael Corbat retires. She will be the first woman to run a major U.S. bank. The move completes a leadership shakeup that has been in the works for more than a year, and it comes at a time when the bank stocks have been struggling. Citi is down 36% this year alone. For the past 5 years, it basically hasn't moved. Let's talk more about all of this with Wells Fargo Securities Senior Banking Analyst Mike Mayo. Mike, great to have you with us. Your thoughts on Jane as the next CEO. Should we expect any real departures from Michael Corbat in terms of strategy, given she's been working so closely with the CEO and the CFO? Didn't really make too many major strategy changes as the head of Global Consumer.
Well, I hope we see changes with Jane Fraser as the new CEO of Citigroup. When you look at the 8-year record of Citi's CEO, you look at the stock price. Citi stock price is up 1/3. The bank index is up 1/2. And the broader market has more than doubled. So the stock price has underperformed. Citigroup today has worst-in-class efficiency, returns, and stock market valuation. The current CEO has done an excellent job to improve the resiliency of Citigroup to a point where it's stronger than it's been in decades. But when it comes to strategy, I think the current or exiting CEO has played it too safe. So I hope Jane Fraser takes a fresh look at the business mix, takes more aggressive actions. As you know, I've been on your show, and I've also gone to many annual meetings of Citigroup and said, why don't you sell off Mexico? Mm-hmm. Why don't you sell off the consumer businesses in Asia? Why don't you act more aggressive? And the biggest mistake made by Citi's current CEO is when he said a few years ago, our restructuring is over. So I hope with the new CEO, you have a fresh look and say, you know what? There's more restructuring to be done. And in Jane's background, she's not only consumer and non-U.S., she's also an ex-McKinsey person. So put that McKinsey hat on and say, hey, how can we restructure Citigroup to improve profitability, not just for the next year, but for the next decade?
Jane Fraser avait déménagé aux États-Unis en raison des opportunités qu'elle voyait pour les femmes là-bas. Elle prendra les commandes du groupe à un moment compliqué pour les banques en raison de la crise économique. Au cours du dernier trimestre, les bénéfices de Citi ont chuté de 73%. La banque a passé plus de 7 milliards de dollars de provisions pour couvrir les pertes potentielles. After US sanction last year, Huawei was forced to release flagship phones without Google Android. Huawei lance donc la deuxième version de son système d'exploitation Harmony OS. The Chinese technology giant said the operating system will come to its own smartphones in 2021.
This announcement made at the Huawei Developer Conference yesterday is a pretty significant milestone for the company, 1 year on since it released its own operating system called Harmony OS. Now, the backstory to this is very important because last year Huawei was put on that US entity list, a blacklist which essentially cut it off from Google's Android operating system. It was forced to release some flagship smartphones without Google's operating system on it, and that's really hurt its standing and market share in some of its international markets as well. Now it's confirming that it will finally bring Harmony OS to its own smartphone devices next year in the hope of regaining some of that share and helping it survive essentially in the smartphone market abroad. Some of the other interesting announcements around this, however, was the fact that it said it was opening up Harmony OS to third-party hardware makers, even rival smartphone makers, rival smartwatch makers, and other rival device makers as well, which is quite a big move. It's kind of positioning itself almost as the Android, the Google Android of China. If you think about it, that's exactly how Google Androids work. It's across a number of different devices, and they made a big pitch to developers to come on board and keep developing apps. And that's a big deal because the more users using Harmony OS, the more developers on board, that's going to create a much stronger ecosystem and ultimately benefit Huawei. Now, Huawei might find some success with this in its Chinese market. I think where one of the biggest challenges lies right now is how this performs in its international markets, where it's been particularly hurt because the iOS, Apple's iOS and Google's Android dominate the international smartphone market right now. They've become successful because of the number of apps, the number of high quality apps and developers on board on these platforms as well. So the big question here is, will Huawei be able to get those apps on? It's still missing some pretty significant apps, the likes of Spotify and Netflix. Given the political environment between the US and China as well, will US developers be on board? And finally, will users be willing to try a new operating system as well? So a lot of challenges ahead, not just on the software side, but of course a deadline coming up that might mean Huawei might not be able to have access to chips as well. Tanveer, back to you.
Yeah, and all those questions really, take us to the point on what do we know about Harmony OS as of now, its technology, Arjun, and how well can it compete with the well-entrenched Google Android on quality and scale?
Well, it's an operating system that Huawei has been working on, not just sort of over the past year, but over the past few years. The way they've pitched this is a single operating system that can work across devices, from smartphones all the way to refrigerators and cars as well. And they're saying to developers, well, you only need to develop one app and it will work across all these devices. That's the way they're trying to pitch this right now. So that's what we know about what Huawei is trying to bring to the market versus, say, the likes of iOS and Google. That's their pitch to developers. I mean, it's hard to tell right now how this will perform, given the fact we haven't seen it on any particular sort of significant devices yet, the likes of smartphones right now. But they're certainly making a big case for developers to go on board. If they can get the developers on board, if they can get the high-profile apps right now, that will certainly help them on their road to success.
L'année dernière, Huawei avait déjà dévoilé la première version d'Harmony OS, son propre système d'exploitation multi-appareils. Cette fois-ci, le système sera intégré sur les smartphones de la marque dès 2021. Je vous le rappelle, Google a suspendu ses activités commerciales avec Huawei. Alors, ce n'est pas grave en Chine où les services Google comme Gmail sont bloqués, mais c'est une démarche importante pour les marchés internationaux de Huawei où les consommateurs sont habitués à utiliser certaines applications. An Irish telecom company, Eir, says it will stick with Huawei. The company says it will continue its €1 billion investment strategy. La position de l'UE diffère de celle des États-Unis. Irish telecom company Eir has no plans to drop Huawei from its network.
Absolutely. We are following the European Union recommendations. So you'll have seen back in January that the European Commission endorsed a 5G toolbox. And effectively, that was, a coordinated approach to network security so that we would all respond, proportionately to any risks in the 5G network. So that includes things like enhanced controls or a dual provider strategy. So at Air, we already have a dual provider strategy. We have Ericsson providing our core network equipment and Huawei providing our radio equipment. We also manage and monitor our network ourselves with our own staff. So, we're behind that EU proposal. And in that EU proposal, there's no recommendations to ban any particular network provider. Also, Air, along with other telcos, leading telcos in Ireland, are working with the National Cyber Security Centre on those protocols and those security protocols to make sure that Ireland is absolutely compliant with that 5G toolbox.
Do you have any concerns that those such as the Internal Market Commissioner Thierry Breton and others will actually change their mind about the safety of Huawei equipment and actually you'll be forced to rip it out and the cost implications with that? At the moment, again, you look like you're on message with the EU as well, but if they change their mind and get more draconian in their response to Huawei, is that going to have enormous implications for your country and for Ireland?
So I'm not expecting them to change their minds, but of course, if the recommendation was to take Huawei kit out of any network, but the majority of telcos in Europe use Huawei equipment, so that would absolutely slow down deployment of these fast networks just at a time when consumers and businesses need them most, and absolutely drive extra cost to the operators to do that and obviously increase the prices as well. But as I said, we're following that European Commission endorsement of the 5G toolbox and I'm not expecting that to change.
Dans une interview exclusive avec CNBC, la directrice générale Caroline Lennon se dit confiante dans la sécurité de Huawei. Elle compte maintenir ses équipements dans certaines parties de son réseau en suivant les recommandations de l'UE. Elle a ajouté que tout changement dans la position actuelle de l'Union européenne coûterait cher aux opérateurs et aux clients. Thank you all for being with us. Merci à tous d'avoir participé à ce format 100% hybride. On se retrouve tous les jours de 7h à 9h pour cette édition. See you very soon for the rest of international news.